When most people think of World War II, they picture soldiers storming beaches, tanks rolling across Europe, and bombers lighting up the night sky. But there was another side to that war, one fought not on battlefields but in the streets, neighborhoods, and living rooms of ordinary families. While nations mobilized their militaries, civilians across Britain and Europe faced a very different kind of enemy: desperation, lawlessness, and fear. During the Blitz, when German aircraft dropped thousands of bombs on British cities, entire families were forced to flee their homes. They took shelter underground, in subway tunnels or countryside bunkers, hoping to survive the chaos above. But the moment those bombs began to fall, something else happened. Something more personal. Homes were left empty, streets went dark, and in that sudden vacuum, opportunists appeared. Looters, thieves, and desperate men prowled through blacked-out cities, looking for anything of value. Imagine returning from a bomb shelter after a night of destruction, only to find your home ransacked. The few possessions you still had stolen while you were hiding for your life. That was the reality for countless civilians. It was a second war, a hidden one, fought inside the shadows of every neighborhood. The government and police were stretched thin. There were no modern alarm systems, no CCTV, no motion detectors, and no electricity most nights. Power was rationed, communication was unreliable, and every family was on their own. So, people adapted. Out of necessity, they began inventing small, clever defenses using whatever they had at hand: bits of wire, tin cans, rope, or even light itself. These weren't military fortifications. They were born from pure survival instinct. Families realized they didn't need weapons to defend themselves. They needed deterrence. They needed to make potential intruders hesitate, to create just enough uncertainty, just enough fear to make them turn back. And that's how a new form of home defense was born, one that relied less on brute force and more on the human mind. Civilians discovered that psychology could be stronger than any lock or weapon. By manipulating fear, sound, and surprise, they could protect what mattered most, even when they had almost nothing. This forgotten era of home defense wasn't about aggression. It was about intelligence. It taught that security isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about making the other person think twice. And that principle, born in the darkest nights of World War II, still works today. As we look deeper into these old methods, it becomes clear that the lessons of those years weren't lost to time. They simply evolved. Modern preppers, homeowners, and security experts still use many of the same ideas that originated in bombed-out neighborhoods of the... Because the truth is simple: fear and hesitation are universal. Whether it's a looter in wartime London or a modern-day intruder, the psychology is the same. When people are uncertain, when they think they might be caught or surprised, they retreat. And that single principle forms the foundation of what became known as layered, passive defense. The concept of layered, passive defense. By 1941, civilians had learned something the hard way. One locked door wasn't enough. A single barrier could be broken, kicked in, or forced open. But several small obstacles working together that created hesitation. That was the secret. This approach became known as layered defense. Instead of one big system that could fail, it relied on multiple small layers of protection. Each layer slowed the intruder down, increased their exposure, and made them question what might be waiting beyond. The first layer was always the physical barrier: a door, a window latch, a bolt. But that was just the surface. The real strength came from what followed: sound, darkness, and deception. These layers didn't just block access, they played with the intruder's mind. Here's the truth: people don't break into homes expecting a fight. Most burglars and looters act out of opportunity. They look for signs of weakness: an easy entry, a quiet street, an empty house. What World War II civilians discovered was that if you could create uncertainty, you could turn that sense of opportunity into fear. For example, a looter approaching a house during the blackout might find a locked door. But what happens next? Maybe the handle rattles louder than expected. Maybe something shifts inside. Maybe there's a faint flicker of light through a curtain. In that instant, the intruder begins to doubt. Is someone inside? Are they being watched? Is it worth the risk? That doubt, that brief hesitation, is often enough to make them leave. That's the essence of passive defense: protection that works without direct confrontation. No shouting, no violence, no weapon, just smart use of environment, noise, and light. Civilians in WWII learned to make their homes appear guarded even when they weren't. A half-drawn curtain, a faint movement of light, or a strategically placed object could give the illusion of an alert occupant. The goal was to manipulate perception, to make every potential intruder believe the home wasn't abandoned, that someone was watching, that entering could be dangerous. And what's fascinating is that this concept remains the backbone of modern home security. Motion lights, fake cameras, automated doorbells, and randomized lighting systems all trace back to this wartime philosophy. The technology has changed, but the psychology hasn't. Layered, passive defense is still the smartest way to protect a home today. Not because it's high-tech, but because it leverages human instinct. It creates confusion, forces mistakes, and makes your home appear to be the hardest target on the block. In wartime London, that could mean the difference between safety and loss. Today, it could mean the difference between a peaceful night and a break-in. Civilians back then didn't wait for rescue or government programs. They became their own line of defense. They realized that true protection wasn't about waiting for help. It was about being clever, being unpredictable, and thinking one step ahead. They didn't have cameras or sirens, but they had imagination. And from that imagination came one of the most ingenious and practical inventions of the entire home defense era, the trap doorway. 2. The trap doorway technique. As the war dragged on, civilians became masters of improvisation. Every night brought new dangers, not just from above, but from the shadows below. Looters and scavengers took advantage of chaos, slipping into homes under cover of darkness. The government couldn't protect everyone, and even the police were overwhelmed. So people took matters into their own hands, and what they came up with was nothing short of brilliant. It started with an idea so simple that it almost sounds childish, using the element of surprise. Civilians began rigging what became known as trap doorway. But don't imagine deadly booby traps or movie-style contraptions. These were non-lethal, psychological deterrents, designed to scare off intruders before any confrontation could happen. The concept was simple: set up small, hidden obstacles and entryways that would trigger fear, confusion, or noise. The most common version used nothing more than a piece of thin wire or string, stretched low across a hallway or doorway. The wire was often nearly invisible in the dim light of a blackout. When an intruder stepped forward in haste, they'd catch the wire, stumble or fall, and the sudden noise would shatter the silence. In that instant, panic set in. The intruder didn't know if they had triggered an alarm, if someone was waiting inside, or if a trap was about to spring. The fear of the unknown, the thought that they'd been caught, was often enough to make them run. And that was exactly the goal. This system didn't rely on strength or violence. It relied on psychology, on understanding how people react under pressure. The tripwire itself didn't need to cause harm. It just needed to make the intruder feel vulnerable, exposed, and uncertain. The brilliance of this method lies in its adaptability. Civilians could build it with whatever they had. A piece of rope, a laundry line, or even string from an old package could do the job. Some added small metal objects, like tin lids or bells, to create sound when disturbed. Others placed loose boards or pots behind doors so that even the faintest movement would make a noise. This was silent warfare inside the home. No bullets, no shouting, just fear turned against those who tried to take advantage of chaos. And it worked. Reports from wartime London show that after one or two failed attempts, when looters tripped, crashed, and exposed themselves, many of them abandoned entire streets. Word spread quickly. Certain houses were guarded, booby-trapped or watched, and that reputation alone became a defense. That's the hidden genius of the trap doorway. It didn't just stop one intruder, it created an aura of danger around the home. People stopped viewing it as an easy target. It became psychologically fortified. Fast forward to today, and that same principle still forms the backbone of modern low-tech security. Tripline alarms, door chime traps, and motion-triggered sound devices are all descendants of that idea. Even advanced motion sensors operate on the same concept, triggering uncertainty and alerting the homeowner before the intruder can gain control. The key here is surprise. Surprise breaks confidence. It forces hesitation, and hesitation saves lives. Most burglars are opportunists. They depend on speed, darkness, and confidence. The moment that confidence breaks, the moment they think they've been caught, they retreat. It doesn't matter if it's a loud alarm or a simple tripwire, the effect is the same. The balance of power shifts instantly. So while the trap doorway might seem primitive compared to today's smart home devices, it's actually built on the same psychology that modern security companies still exploit, the use of fear and uncertainty as the ultimate weapon. And what makes it truly powerful is how accessible it still is. You can replicate this system today, safely, legally, and cheaply. A few feet of cord, a bell, or even a motion-activated noisemaker placed at a door or hallway is enough to bring back that same sense of control. You don't need technology to be secure. You need awareness. You need foresight. You need creativity. Because no matter how much the world changes, human instincts remain the same. When a person feels uncertain, when their senses tell them danger might be near, they back off. That was true in 1941, and it's still true now. The trap doorway stands as proof that sometimes the simplest tools, used wisely, can outperform the most advanced gadgets. It's not the device that matters, it's the mind behind it. 3. The blackout defense, using darkness as a weapon. During the Blitz, darkness became both a curse and a shield. Cities were forced into nightly blackouts to avoid drawing the attention of enemy bombers. Every light, every candle, every flicker from a window could mean the difference between safety and being targeted. So civilians adapted. They covered windows with thick curtains, painted glass panes, dark and used only dim, covered lights indoors. Entire neighborhoods vanished into pitch-black silence each night. But this blackout, originally a safety measure against air raids, also turned into one of the most effective psychological defenses against intruders. Here's why. In total darkness, no one could see what was inside a house. A looter approaching a completely dark home couldn't tell if it was empty, guarded, or even booby-trapped. The lack of visibility created uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds hesitation. Civilians quickly realized they could use this to their advantage. Darkness became a weapon, not just against bombers, but against the criminal element lurking below. Some households developed what became known as the blackout trick. They used light sparingly, just enough to create illusion and control perception. A faint flicker of a covered lamp behind thick curtains, a sudden flash from a hidden flashlight, or a carefully timed shadow across a window could all send a message. Someone's awake. Someone's watching. Someone's ready. Even the smallest illusion of presence could stop an intruder cold. This tactic played on one of the oldest fears in human psychology: the fear of being seen. No thief wants to break into a home where the owner might be waiting in the dark. The risk is too high. The blackout defense, then, wasn't about total invisibility. It was about controlling what others could see, or rather what they couldn't. Civilians learned that by manipulating light, they could manipulate behavior. This same principle is still in use today. Modern homeowners install motion-activated lighting that flares up when someone approaches. Others use randomized timers to make lights switch on and off even when no one's home. The result? Uncertainty. The same powerful deterrent that kept looters away in 1940 now keeps burglars guessing in 2025. For survivalists and preppers, the lesson runs deeper. You don't need electricity to control light. A small solar-powered lamp, connected to a motion sensor, or even a simple switch, can give the illusion of presence off-grid. Place it behind a curtain or window, and you recreate the same defensive trick that wartime families use to protect their homes. The essence of the blackout defense is simple. Visibility is power. The less your enemy can see, the more control you have. The ability to decide when, where, and how light appears turns the environment itself into a defensive tool. 4. The power of noise as defense. If light was the weapon of control, then sound was the weapon of exposure. During the blackouts of World War II, silence wasn't peaceful. It was terrifying. Every creak, every gust of wind, every faint footstep carried through empty streets like an echo in a tomb. And in that stillness, civilians discovered something powerful. Noise could defend a home just as effectively as a lock. Wartime families didn't have alarm systems or sirens. They had pots, pans, and resourcefulness. The concept was simple. If you couldn't see an intruder, you could hear them. People started hanging metal objects on strings near entry points, doors, gates, and windows. It might be tin cans, pans, or even bits of scrap metal tied loosely together. The moment someone tried to open a door or window, the movement would cause a clatter. The sound, sharp and unmistakable, would slice through the still air, jolting both the homeowner and the intruder. It didn't just startle, it exposed. The noise instantly destroyed the intruder's illusion of stealth. They could no longer move quietly, no longer control the situation. The entire purpose of their approach, to get in unnoticed, was ruined in seconds. Most burglars fled as soon as they realized they'd made noise. That's the power of sound. It turns control back to the defender. This wasn't just about improvisation. It was psychological warfare. A single loud noise could make an intruder imagine all kinds of things. That someone had heard them, that a neighbor might be watching, or that more defenses were waiting inside. Sound amplified fear, and fear was the strongest deterrent of all. Families became creative. Some rigged up doors so that even a slight movement caused a loud metallic scrape. Others placed loose boards or small containers filled with stones near entrances, so the faintest vibration would trigger a rattle. In a world where silence meant danger, any sound became a signal of safety. This was, in many ways, the first alarm system, and it cost nothing. It didn't rely on power or batteries. It was completely self-sufficient. And most importantly, it was reliable, because human ears don't need electricity. Today, that same principle survives in modern form. From door chime alarms and window vibration sensors to motion-triggered sirens, every noise-based security system can trace its lineage back to those wartime tin cans strung on a thread. Even in remote, off-grid survival setups, the lessons still apply. Preppers often use makeshift sound traps around campsites or rural cabins. Tin cans, pebbles in containers, or bells tied to fishing line. The technology hasn't changed much because it doesn't need to. It works as well now as it did in 19. What makes noise such a powerful defensive tool is that it attacks both the mind and the body. It breaks the intruder's focus, triggers adrenaline, and creates a moment of panic. That split-second reaction is often all it takes to make someone flee. Security experts today call this active deterrence through passive design. In other words, you don't have to act, your environment acts for you. You're creating a situation where movement equals noise, and noise equals exposure. That's the beauty of what those civilians create. They turned weakness into strength. A dark, silent home became a trap for the unprepared. Every sound was a weapon. Every creak was a warning. And while modern society loves high-tech solutions, smart locks, digital cameras, biometric scanners, the truth is, nothing beats the raw, instinctive reaction of fear when silence is broken by unexpected sound. In a crisis, when power fails or systems shut down, it won't be the gadgets that protect you. It'll be the same principle that protected ordinary families during the war. Making your environment work for you. Letting noise speak when you can't. 5. Turning history into modern security. When you look at the defenses civilians built during World War II, one thing becomes clear: they weren't just trying to survive, they were thinking like strategists. They studied human behavior, used limited resources, and built systems that worked with, not against, the environment. That mindset is exactly what modern security still depends on today. The brilliance of WWII home defense was its adaptability. People didn't have access to new equipment or professional help. They had to work with what they had: wire cans, nails, rope, and sheer determination. And yet, those simple materials became the foundation of layered home defense that still inspires preppers, off-gridders, and even professional security consultants. Let's break down how those principles translate directly to modern times. Start with physical barriers. In the 1940s, civilians reinforced doors with chairs, bars, and floor wedges. Today, the same principle lives on in what preppers call blitz bars. Simple metal or wooden braces that secure a door against forced entry. They don't rely on locks alone. They create resistance that buys you time. Next, consider window defenses. Wartime homes covered basement or ground-level windows with heavy mesh, wooden planks, or metal grates. The goal wasn't to make the home indestructible, it was to make it inconvenient. Modern equivalents include steel mesh, shatterproof film, and internal bars. Again, the purpose is the same: slow down the threat, increase frustration, and create doubt. Then comes the visual deterrence layer. WWII families didn't have cameras, but they knew how to play with perception. A single flicker of light, a moving curtain, or a shadow could make it seem like someone was awake and watching. Today, homeowners use dummy cameras, motion lights, or beware of dog signs, often backed by real systems to create the same psychological barrier. The best modern defenses combine both physical and mental deterrence. That's the secret the WWII generation figured out through experience. No single layer will save you, but together, they make you untouchable. Imagine an intruder approaching a house that looks unpredictable. A door that might be reinforced, windows with barriers, motion lights that flash randomly, and faint sounds that suggest movement inside. The intruder's confidence evaporates. That's layered defense at work. And here's the real insight. You don't need to spend thousands on it. WWII civilians didn't. They used imagination, not money. They designed systems of confusion, where every sense, sight, sound, touch, worked against the intruder. A modern homeowner can do the same. Reinforce your doors and frames. Add visible deterrence, real or fake, to suggest surveillance. Install lighting that activates unpredictably. Use small, low-tech sound traps around vulnerable areas. Each element alone is simple. Together, they form a network of resistance that manipulates human psychology. The goal isn't to make your home impenetrable, it's to make it undesirable. Because criminals don't want a challenge, they want a target. And WWII families understood that better than anyone. Their legacy isn't just historical, it's practical. Their defenses still hold up because they tap into something timeless, the way fear, uncertainty, and hesitation control human behavior. When you understand that, you realize true security doesn't come from technology. It comes from strategy. 6 core lessons from WWII theme. The bands. When we look back at those years, at blackout curtains, tin can alarms, tripwires, and flickering lights, it's easy to see them as relics of a bygone era. But the truth is, these weren't just improvised defenses. They were lessons in survival psychology, lessons that remain as sharp today as they were in 1942. During the war, the average person wasn't a soldier. They didn't have training or weapons or command structures. What they did have was instinct, and that instinct drove them to invent defenses that worked not through violence, but through control of perception. That's the first core lesson. True defense isn't about confrontation, it's about control. The goal was never to win a fight, it was to prevent one from happening. Every tripwire, every noise trap, every flicker of light was meant to send one message: you are not safe here. Someone is watching. Someone will hear you. When fear shifts to the intruder, the defender wins without lifting a finger. That's psychological dominance. And it's the foundation of modern home security. The second lesson: technology doesn't equal safety. Anticipation does. WWII civilians had no modern systems, yet their methods worked because they anticipated behavior. They asked the right questions. Where would an intruder approach from? What would they fear most? How can we use that fear against them? That anticipation, that ability to think 2 steps ahead, is what kept homes safe. And it's still the skill most people overlook today. People buy gadgets, install systems, but forget to think like the person who might try to get in. The third lesson: defense isn't a product. It's a mindset. Those civilians didn't wait for governments or authorities to protect them. They accepted responsibility. They looked at what they had: rope, nails, old metal, and turned it into a defense system. In today's world, where many rely on convenience and automation, that mindset is fading. But if the power goes out, if systems fail, or if help can't come, that old mindset, resourcefulness, becomes priceless again. And the final lesson: fear and confusion are weapons, if you know how to use them. The tripwire didn't physically stop the intruder. The noise trap didn't harm them. The blackout flicker didn't block the door. Yet together they made the intruder stop, hesitate, rethink. That hesitation was the real barrier. Because no matter how determined someone is, hesitation kills momentum. And in defense, that's all you need. A few seconds of hesitation can mean the difference between safety and disaster. WWII didn't have time for theories. They had to find what worked, and what worked then still works now. Because human psychology hasn't evolved much since the 1940s. Fear is still fear. Surprise is still surprise. And the instinct to run from danger, whether real or imagined, is still universal. That's why these old tricks, though forgotten by most, are still instant deterrent. They don't rely on strength, or wealth, or power, only on understanding human nature. And that, ultimately, is what made the WWII home defenders some of the most effective security innovators in history. 7. Modern takeaway: resilience over technology. Fast forward to today. Our homes are filled with smart locks, motion sensors, and cloud-connected cameras. We live in a world where technology promises safety at the tap of an app, but when the power goes out, or the network fails, or the batteries die, what's left? That's where the forgotten wisdom of WWII comes back to life, because resilience, not technology, is the real key to safety. Resilience means your home can still protect you when everything else fails. It means you can still detect, deter, and delay an intruder without relying on electricity or external systems. It's about being able to defend yourself with nothing but your surroundings. That's the mindset WWII with civilians had. Their defenses were layered, flexible, and adaptable. They could build or dismantle them in minutes. If one layer failed, another one took over. That adaptability, not the tools themselves, was what made them so effective. Modern security experts have started relearning those lessons. Tripwire alarms are now sold as perimeter alerts. Randomized lighting systems mimic the old blackout flicker technique, and even the military uses the same idea, combining deception, delay, and detection in modern base defense design. But you don't need to be military trained to use these principles. You just need to remember 3 rules: always build in layers. Don't trust one system, stack them. Physical barriers, visual deterrents, and noise traps working together make a home a nightmare for intruders. Plan for failure. Every defense should still function if power, Wi-Fi, or batteries die. That's resilience. Low-tech systems backing up high-tech ones. Think psychologically. Use uncertainty as your greatest weapon. Motion lights that trigger randomly, sound traps that rattle when touched, shadows that move behind curtains, all create the illusion of an alert defender. When everything around you becomes uncertain, fear takes over. And fear, not force, is what truly protects you. WWII civilians didn't survive because they were strong. They survived because they were clever, because they learned to use what they had, not what they wished they had. That's the same kind of thinking modern preppers, survivalists, and security-conscious homeowners need today. In a blackout, in a grid-down event, or even just in a moment of isolation, your best defense will never be a gadget. It will be your strategy and your ability to adapt. So the next time you think of security, don't start with "what should I buy?" Start with "what can I build?" That's the WWII spirit, and it's what makes real resilience timeless. 8. Outro message. As the war faded and peace returned, many of those old tricks, the tripwires, the tin cans, the blackout lights, were forgotten. People tore down their homemade defenses, replaced them with comfort and convenience, and moved on. But buried in that history lies a kind of wisdom the modern world desperately needs to remember. Because survival, real survival, isn't about panic or paranoia, it's about preparedness. And preparedness begins with understanding how to protect yourself when no one else can. The civilians of World War II didn't have the luxury of waiting for help. They didn't have surveillance cameras, police alerts, or home insurance to fall back on. They had their own ingenuity. Their security was built on scarcity, and that made it unbreakable. Today, when we talk about home defense, we often think about weapons, systems, or subscription. But the greatest defense tool you'll ever have is your mindset, the one that sees potential in simplicity and strength in history. Those who value real resilience, the kind that works when the lights go out, can learn deeply from those WWII homeowners who built safety from nothing but scraps. Their defenses weren't made of steel, they were made of thought. Their alarms weren't electronic, they were human. And that's what this story is really about, remembering that sometimes, the most effective protection doesn't come from what's new, but from what's proven. The next time you walk through your front door, imagine for a moment the sound of distant sirens, the darkness of a wartime blackout, and the quiet determination of a family setting up tripwires and tin cans. They weren't paranoid. They understood that safety wasn't about fear, it was about foresight. So as modern threats evolve and technology races ahead, take a moment to look back, to learn from those who defended their homes with nothing but creativity, to respect the forgotten trick that still stops intruders instantly, the psychology of surprise, the power of sound, and the illusion of control. Because in the end, defense isn't just about walls and locks, it's about sending one message, clear and powerful. This home is alert, this home is ready, and you should turn back now.